Hey guys, what's back to the video? I just got out of watching John Wick Chapter 4, and in this video, I'm just gonna talk all things spoilers about the movie. I'm gonna be honest, initially I planned to do a spoiler-free review, just quick initial thoughts, but I saw this movie, and honestly, it's one of the greatest action movies I've ever laid my eyes on, so I have general outlines written down, but I'm just gonna be going pretty much completely off the dome for this video, talking about any and all aspects about this movie. So with that being said, feel free to have as much of a spoiler discussion in the comments down below. I want to hear everything you guys loved, hated about this movie, because I have so many thoughts on this film, because again, I believe it to be one of the greatest action films ever made. Literally right when I got out of watching this movie, my mind was buzzing. I had so much I wanted to talk about. So if you guys want to check out general timestamps, they'll be in the description down below. But again, I feel like I'm just going to talk about anything and everything that I want to talk about. So again, sit back, grab a snack, and I'm excited to talk about John Wick Chapter 4. Also, just want to let you guys know that I'll be ranking the entire John Wick franchise later this weekend as I rewatched the first 3 before 4 came out. So I'm super excited to that. So subscribe so you don't miss that later this weekend. But getting into it, man, this movie is something special. It is so obviously the first thing we're gonna talk about is the action, right? It is some of the best action I've ever seen. Honestly, it's right behind, like, obviously Mad Max Fury Road is like top tier car chase action ever, because the whole movie is basically like one long chase sequence. But in terms of individual moments and just how epic it gets, I think this is top of the top. For me, my top 2 action movies of all time right now are Mission Impossible Fallout and Mad Max Fury Road. Mission Impossible Fallout, I don't think it has that same scale as Mad Max Fury Road, but it still does those big, insane, stupid, crazy Tom Cruise stunts, but it also does just the hand-to-hand combat so well. But what this movie does, John Wick Chapter 4, it takes hand-to-hand combat to a whole new level. I would say in general, there's about like 3 full action sequences, like 3 main big ones. You have one in the very beginning, one in the middle-ish, and then one at the very, very end, kind of right before the final battle, which the final battle isn't even really a final battle. Again, there will be spoilers. I'm about to spoil something really, really big. So again, click off this video because spoilers from here on out. But obviously we end the movie with that duel against Donnie Yang. I think that's the actor's name. But we have a duel between 2 characters that are literally best friends. And so I just love that the movie doesn't end on like some big action sequence, and like the whole movie has big action sequences. I'm going to talk about the pacing later in this video, but it's so well done throughout this movie, and the movie consistently delivers great action, but it knows when to slow down. Really, it knows when to stop, because again, that whole build up to the final battle is him getting up those stairs and just that whole run. I mean, here's the thing also, it feels like these main big action sequences take up most of the movie. Like, they're pretty much, I would say it's like an hour and a half of the movie. At least that's what it felt like. I mean, the movie as a whole flew by for me because it did not feel like it was 2 hours and 40 whatever minutes. It honestly felt like it was like just over 2 hours. And so I love the way that they paced it all, because it never feels like it drags on. And in part, obviously, I think that is because of the choice to make that final battle not something big and grand, but to make it something really emotional, and also make it something that's like really calculated by the end, where John Wick doesn't end up shooting his gun and then he shoots Alexander Skarsgård's character in the face after. And so that all works really, really well. And so I just love the way they play all of that action out. As for the action itself, you have your classic pistol scenes that was in like the first movie, and then the second movie, it introduced like more pistol action, but along with animals, like dog fights, which was amazing. And this movie furthers that. It's literally the same dog. It's that one character's dog, and it's that the whole movie, and it works so well. And I love that they didn't kill off that dog, but I love that it makes you feel like the dog is gonna die, because if you guys remember right before, or like it's actually like right when the whole like it's not a warehouse, but like the old like worn down building, John's about to shoot the other guy that's like hunting him and like waiting for his bounty to go up. Also, I'm really bad with character names, by the way, and I just got out of this movie, so I don't have a list of the characters in front of me or anything like that, so I'm not gonna remember them name for name. But that scene where he's about to kill the guy and then he sees the bodyguard guy about to shoot the guy's dog, and then he ends up shooting the guy instead of the dog. And it's so well done. It's so well paced. And again, it just works for John Wick's character to save the dog rather than kill the guy that's hunting him down. But other than that, we also have our classic car chase sequences. John Wick 2 starts off with a phenomenal car chase sequence. And John Wick can never manage to keep his doors on his car for some reason, but I love it because it number one, it's a perfect artistic choice because it lets you see John Wick's like whole body and like the whole top of his head, and then also the rest of his body, like whenever he's ducking down to shoot and like going through the side windows, the front windows. It just works really, really well. There's also one part in this in like the one where they're driving around the circle, that big action sequence where every one of the stunt cars is chasing. It's so cool where like he like swoops out of his car to grab the gun, and then he picks it up and starts shooting because it fell out earlier. It is so well done. And honestly, just in general, all of the fights in this movie feel so well planned out. And you can tell because they're so long. Like, obviously, you have your shorter fight sequences. And even in the first movie, or in the second movie, where you have in the very beginning the knife fight, the book fight, and then you have the one right before that, the car fight. You have all these different fights, but they're separated to an extent. These fight sequences are so long. It's actually insane. And I know I skipped around to like that second and third fight, but the one in the very beginning at the hotel, I forget where the hotel is located, but they had just destroyed the New York embassy and they're at another one. And I think it's in somewhere in an Asian country. I don't know exactly what country. I don't remember what country it was in, but they do a great job of utilizing other weapons that we don't normally see. Obviously, they have their guns because that's where the people that are intruding the hotel, that's their weapons, but they're literally lined up with bows and arrows. I also find it really funny that this movie was initially like 3 hours and 45 minutes. So that means they pretty much cut an hour down. And just thinking about how much variety they had in the action, like I didn't even mention this, but they have the nunchuck stuff too. And the sword stuff, it works because I think like the last movie or in chapter 3, they did a great job with the very end in that like glass room where they had the swords and they utilized it really well with all of the glass casings and all that kind of stuff. The kills were really unique. In this movie, I like that they incorporated all elements of it because when you have your original cut being 3 hours and 45 minutes, I feel like what you can really only cut is story and lore elements. And I'll talk about the story and lore later in this video because I have a lot of thoughts on that as well, because I'm not one that really understands the mythological like allegories and stuff like that. And again, I'll talk about that later. I'm getting off track here, but the action of itself, there's no way they filmed like massive action sequences and had to cut them out because that's just so much of their budget. But I like the fact that they could still pace it throughout and then still cut down some of the story. It just shows how much effort they put into integrating action and story because it still works when they cut out a lot of the story elements, if that's what the 3 hours and 45 minutes was. Again, we don't have that confirmed or denied whether it was story or big action sequences, but with the runtime still being 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is insanely long still, I just love the way that they implement all of the like the actiony elements, I guess, or like the methods of action per se, because again, in the beginning, due to the location, you can have a different type of fight with nunchucks, swords, bows and arrows. That works. Second fight, and I'm talking about the like, okay, here's the 3 big fights I guess I'm basing this movie off of. The first one in the hotel, and then the second one with like that big Fisk, Oswald, Cobblepot type of character, like the big club fight scene. And I think there's one before that, but I don't remember too much. Like it wasn't like one of the, I wouldn't say story-wise it felt like a very big fight, but obviously there were fights throughout this movie, even just in smaller moments that were like story-based just to get from one point to another. But and then the final fight that I'm talking about is like the one that like goes from when Alexander Skarsgård's character puts a bounty on John Wick's head and it like slowly increases and increases. That is like basically the whole third act is just an action scene, and they transform pretty much everything they've done in the franchise so far into one big fight. They go from just him on the run and then a car chase sequence, and that car chase sequence is arguably the best car chase of all time. It is so, not only is it a really long sequence, but it's also so big. Like they're going around one monument the whole time, right? So it's a circle and there's constantly cars moving in both directions. I mean, if you guys drive, you know how difficult the circles are to get through. Think about that, but in a like around a monument with hundreds of cars going in and out of this circle, and have these people out to get John Wick because it's a free bounty on his head. People know where John Wick is. He's basically a walking $40 million at that point. And then you go to the whole like torn down warehouse thing, and you have that fight, and the way they shoot that fight. Oh my Lord. Okay. Let me tell you guys, I'm just gonna slow down here because I'm about to get really hyped over this scene. Let me tell you guys, I don't know if you guys saw, I made a short film a while ago called To Thomas. I worked on another one that never ended up finishing. If you guys want to check out the video on that, that's also on the channel. But I'm very interested in cinematography and like just like the plausible side of shooting things. Like filming, just how you film it is very interesting to me. Lighting, setup, where the set is, because when I'm shooting stuff, I understand that like, okay, it's really difficult, especially on a short film, to even on such a small scale, not have stuff be in your shot, even with such a small crew. It does take meticulous planning. And that that broken down house scene was absurd because it's literally a drone shot going above a full set that's supposed to mimic the inside of a house. It's basically like, you know, when you're touring a house or whatever and you have the layout, it's that, but it's just from above. Where the hell is the crew standing? And so it has to be so, in the shotgun. I mean, here's the thing. The action is one thing. It's amazing. The choreography is awesome. But the way that they execute it visually, that is a whole different story. I just want to talk about the action for just a little bit longer. I don't have much else to say that's like different, but I do want to say that I feel like to an extent the action did get a little bit like out there this time, but I think it works. I think a lot of people, I saw one guy on Twitter compare it to the Fast and Furious franchise. That is absurd. Like it is not nearly on that level of change. But there's definitely a difference, you know, there's definitely a big comparison between the first John Wick and this one. But when you look back at it, I mean, I just rewatched John Wick 3 last night before watching John Wick 4, and it's not that much different. Like, I think the dog stuff was a really big step up in terms of just like how grounded this really is. But also lore wise, it consistently increases and you get higher up the high table, like hierarchy and stuff like that. And so it kind of makes sense that these people are just getting more and more epic, more and more fantastical, because that's just the direction the story is going in. Now, I'm going to talk about the very ending, like the obviously John's death and stuff like that. I'll get to that story-wise, but I just don't feel like it was kind of jarring just in terms of like how colorful and like this style felt different in this movie. Not visual stuff, not visually. I mean, like, more like action-wise. The style wasn't too different. Like, it's still that absurdly innovative action that we had in the first, second, third, and like, obviously now the fourth movie. They're always switching it up. They're always doing something very different and unique. But I think story-wise, they do a great thing of just, they know where their basis is, and they kind of lie in that. The reason why I'm a fan of John Wick's 1, 2, and 3, but I don't really find the stories to be emotionally resonant. The first one is just because it's basic, but that's also at its fault in my opinion because it's too basic. But when you look at John Wick 4, the core of the story is around friendship, and the core of the story is very emotional. I didn't really feel that in John Wick 3, and I didn't really feel that in John Wick 2 either. I think John Wick 1 I did obviously because it starts off with this amazing backstory, or not, it's not even backstory, but like it starts off with this great origin of John Wick and why he's back against like the high table and why he went excommunicado in John Wick 2. All of that makes sense. And again, lore-wise, story-wise, they do a great job of building it all up. But it never emotionally resonated, at least with me. Other people, I can't speak for you, but for me, what this movie does so well is it takes John Wick, the badass action hero that is just like all guns blazing, knives throwing, axe throwing, sword fighting. It takes that John Wick, but it makes him fight for something that feels like directly emotional. And I think that's with the side character, the one that's blind. I feel like the way that they go about presenting a story works really well. I will say though, and I thought about this on the way home from the theater, is that imagine if they like John Wick 1, like the blind character was in that movie, and we already had some connection to him, and like maybe we think he died, or like maybe it looks like he died, but he's still alive. He was taken in by someone, or maybe like he just ran away, or he got away from the high table, or whatever it was. And then John Wick 2 and 3, he's not in the movies at all because we think something happened to him. He's done in the franchise. He's a one-off. It's fine. We have a lot of one-off characters in this franchise so far. And then he comes back in John Wick 4, and then he has to be the one that ends up taking John Wick's life at the end of the movie. And so I think if they had built that up, it would have been 100 times cooler in this movie. But it's still really well done. And honestly, and I hate to be this guy, but emotionally, this franchise is one of the ones that I connect least to. And that's why it's not like, I know a lot of people recently have been like, oh, John Wick needs to be in the category for like one of the best franchises of all time. And I agree, but it's like not like up there. Like I'm still putting the MCU for me personally, still putting Harry Potter up there. Like it's Spider-Man, the Spider-Man movies, like the Raimi trilogy. I'm putting the Dark Knight trilogy. Like there's a lot of franchises that I'm putting above John Wick, but it's just because I don't emotionally resonate to John Wick at all. Like, I mean, until John Wick 4. And so I think John Wick 4 solidifies it there and is like, okay, we've built all of this up, and we're up there, and it works now. But I'm saying it wasn't there before this movie, and story-wise, they do an amazing job of just building it up. Also, I think this honestly actually goes kind of more into characters, I guess. But again, don't know most of the characters' names because I'm not looking at a cast list right now. But I was like, there's so many characters in this trailer. There's so many like amazing actors and actresses in this movie. They're going to be like 2 scenes and they're done. But no, everyone is integral. Everyone plays an important part. Thing is, like, Lawrence Fishburne, he's not even in the movie for that long, but like he's an integral, like because he was in the previous movies, obviously. Him and then the guy that was the manager of the hotel, the New York hotel, they're obviously the only ones that are kind of reoccurring characters, I guess you could say, and it to an extent, other than John Wick, obviously. But they're like the only ones that like are reoccurring characters, so it's fine that they don't get like nearly as much screen time. But all these other characters that are just now introduced, they're all like emotionally resonant. They all have relationships that I care about. They're all honestly understanding in the story. I feel like they have a proper place, even though there's so many of them. I feel like it works really, really well. Again, no, this is kind of a big jump from what I was talking about before about like friendship, closure, the story, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, actually, this is literally the ending of the story, so not so much. But John's death, it felt weird, but not really. Like, it felt like it made sense for this. Like, so the thing I was wondering was, is John Wick gonna die? Because it kind of feels like there's like not a need for John Wick to die because they can just kind of have him live happily ever after. But then I'm like thinking back to the whole movie and I'm like trying to run through like, okay, where do they tease this? And I go back to it where John is talking to Alexander Skarsgård's character, where maybe it's Bill Skarsgård, actually. I don't know the name difference between whatever. So they're talking at that table. John's basically like, John Wick is like, yeah, I'm going to challenge you, all that kind of stuff. And Bill Skarsgård's character, I don't know which Skarsgård it is. It is Bill Skarsgård. I was saying Alexander Skarsgård in the beginning of this video. That's my bad, guys. But yeah, when they're sitting across from the table from each other, Bill Skarsgård's character is like, once, if you kill me and you're free, you have no other purpose. There is no John. There's only John Wick. And that kind of made me, I was thinking back to that, I was kind of like, that is true. Like as much as I hate to say it, like before he died, John saw a vision of him and his wife, and that was it. Like, he was free, but there's no other place to go. Like, the only place for him to go is like death, like I guess in a sense to also just like meet his wife. And that was like, that's kind of the whole point of this. I don't really know if that makes any sense actually, that like he wanted to go meet his wife, but but that's it. Like, he was free and that's all that he wanted. But like Bill Skarsgård's character said, is like, you are nothing without like killing. Like, And I also think the fact that Bill Skarsgård's like that bullet that went through his head was the last bullet that John Wick ever fired. That is also closure, and the fact that it's like you brought this upon yourself. You made me shoot like this guy that I also love and is my friend when they do the shoot off and the sand and stuff like this. Like I just, again, I don't know what I'm saying here, but I love it. That's pretty much it for like organized thoughts. There's some random things I do want to talk about though. I do want to talk about the music because it was freaking amazing. The music in this movie, it's like a great mix of like, at the end it becomes really Western-y because it's kind of like a Western shoot off. In the beginning, it's very like ding, 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 ding. Like it's very like sporadic music, I guess. That made no sense at all, but I'm going to stick with it. And then in the middle of the movie, like a good chunk of it is very like techno, but in a great way. Like it's not like an overbearing way, but even that fight sequence in the end of the first big one at the other hotel that wasn't blown up, that one is really, really great because you have, or it's when when the guy's daughter, the hotel manager's daughter gets shot and she gets shot and he's going to save her and he's killing off like last like 3-4 guys. There's intense music up until that point, and right when those 3 guys pop up, it's shing shing shing, like just the sounds of the sword and nothing else. And I don't mind whenever they go silent action where it's just like the sound of the actual weapons, but sometimes it can be overdone, especially in like fight scenes. But when you can utilize the music in a way that enhances it when it's even not there. Like the fact that you have no music enhances it, but also the fact that you eventually do put in music also enhances it. It's a really, really great job just in terms of like how they balance it, I guess. Also, one big thing I noticed about this movie is, and it could have been 100% CGI and we would just never know because CGI is just amazing these days, obviously in Hollywood, but it felt like everything was practical, especially like, well, here's the thing. I don't know if sometimes a lot of the close-up shots, especially near the end of the movie, I think it's also because it was sunset, and so all of the colors look unnatural in the first place, right? Like you're inherently, whenever you have a background that is like basically like orange and gray, it's very hard to get that like consistent lighting on characters without it looking really, really unnatural. And same thing with the part where Bill Skarsgård's character is that they're making that deal about the entire duel, and there's that blue background with the Eiffel Tower behind them. That also looked a little bit odd, but for the most part, I'm pretty sure they did all of it practical because like all of the sets and big pieces behind the characters, the locations, because it really felt like it wasn't like they were interacting with the environment in terms of like shooting the monument down or like running a car into the monuments that they were around, but I guess maybe it's because it was like a circle that they were shooting on where they have that massive car chase sequence. It felt like we were really there because they were going in a loop, and it felt like they were just in like really in that area. And then obviously the shotgun scene where he's going around room to room to room to room, that overhead shot works really, really well because you can see everything and everything's laid out. And also, oh my God, this had me geeking when it was kind of the beginning. It was like one of the first kills in that older house where John's in that house and the light is only coming through windows. And it's very, very like cut off lighting. And you only see the lighting because of the dust, like the dust area in front of the window, and John is killing this guy and the gun is like this on the guy's head, and you only see the blood shooting out of the top of his head because of the light and the dust coming through the window. And it's basically like a silhouette with blood coming out, and it is and this movie is filled with great action, but that like lighting wise is some of the like one of the best kills I've ever seen. Delivers such a great impact, and just the way that you can actually feel it while not seeing the person actually, like their face actually exploding. It is so well executed. And finally, and this kind of, I guess, goes into the story that I was talking about before, but just in general, like, I don't know how to word this, but the story is great. The pacing is great. Again, this is a long movie and it does not feel long at all whatsoever. But what I feel like works so well is and also I know I talked about it being fantastical in terms of the action, but also there is so many sets. Like there is so much different scenery, and not only does it allow for different elements of action, storytelling, character development, all that kind of stuff. That's all great. But the fact that they have such unique locations makes it feel like a really just expansive adventure. And I feel like we don't really get that with action movies much now. And I think it only works if you're super expansive, like a Mission Impossible movie, or super concise, like, for example, a movie like Bullet Train, where it is very action heavy, but it takes place in a fairly limited space, especially compared to what other big action movies are like. But in Bullet Train's case, it works because they don't need all of this like plethora of different action to actually finish, right? And in Mission Impossible, you have this plethora of action, but it's all different scales. John Wick, it has a plethora of action, but it's all a fairly similar scale, but it's also unique in itself. Like the different, I guess you could classify this whole thing as hand-to-hand combat in this movie, but the different like moments and ways of variation inside of it is so well done. And again, I feel like we would not get that feeling of expansiveness and uniqueness if it wasn't for this adventure. And I understand why this movie took so long to make. You know what's crazy, actually? I was looking at this yesterday. I totally forgot that Matrix Resurrections and John Wick 4 were supposed to come out on the same day in like 2021. They announced this date like before COVID happened, I think. It was like 2019 after John Wick Parabellum came out. And so that was really interesting. It was like sometime in 2020 maybe that they announced it. I don't know. But it was so crazy that those two movies were supposed to come out the same days. But I understand why John Wick 4 got pushed back, because if they did shoot on location, I could understand why there were so many restrictions, because they're in so many crazy sets and it's so expansive. And again, I feel like this movie, and this is the final thing I'm going to say for this video, this movie feels like the perfect definition of loving craft. Like, it feels like every element of this movie that was once 3 hours and 45 minutes in the first cut, this full 2 hour and 45 minute adventure, right? It feels like every single moment, every single shot was meticulously planned out. They could have spent 10 million years on each frame of this movie and I would have believed it, because everything feels so purposeful. And I'm not saying, like, I'm not one to be like, oh, Hollywood's like stupid, like only legacy sequels, only superhero movies. Like, I enjoy legacy sequels. I enjoy superhero movies. I enjoy sequels for that matter. John Wick 4 brings together every element that I love of the John Wick franchise prior, but just elevates it. And I feel like a lot of movies don't do that anymore, especially ones that are based off of something previous. Obviously, this is a direct continuation of the John Wick franchise, so this is a completely different situation. But I'm just talking in general. We don't really see an evolution like this, where the final movie feels like a real culmination of everything, a real culmination of basically this franchise that's changed action in Hollywood forever, at least in my opinion. They've literally taken every amazing piece from John Wick 1, John Wick 2, and John Wick 3. It made John Wick 4. And for that, I'm going to give you guys my score right now. I'm going to give John Wick 4 a 9 out of 10. And honestly, I watched it in Dolby this time. I'm hoping to watch it in IMAX within the next week. And I think this could bump up to a 9.5. 100% honest, making it one of my favorite movies of all time. I just need to rewatch it. I was a fan of the pacing, but that's one thing that I kind of want to go back and see how I feel about the pacing on a second watch. See how pretty much just the action being paced. I kind of want to revisit that. But as of now, it's a 9 out of 10. I don't see it going lower. I really only seeing it staying the same or going higher. So very excited to check it out again sometime in the near future. But that's pretty much it on all of my thoughts on John Wick 4. I know I was all over the place in this video, but like I said before, I initially planned to just do a spoiler-free review, which would have to be a lot more concise. I have to think about what I'm saying a lot more, just in terms of like not spoiling anything for you guys. But I just wanted to talk about this movie because, again, one of the greatest action movies of all time. Also, remember, I will be doing a John Wick franchise ranked later this weekend because I rewatched the first 3 movies before I watched John Wick 4 tonight. So very excited to do that. I have a lot of thoughts on the franchise as a whole because I, for one, do not really understand the mythical allegories and stuff like that. So I kind of separated myself from that kind of stuff and focused more on individual action, storytelling, all that kind of stuff. So I'm very excited for the movie. I mean, that video in that regard. But as always, let me know you guys thought of John Wick 4. Feel free to spoil away in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.